Okay. The Hebrew verb. Uh-huh. Hebrew verbs must be analyzed with regard to several different features. Don't let the list scare you. Um, Let me tell you what these things mean. Um, Root basically is another way of saying vocabulary. Um, the majority, I mean, technically all, but kind of the majority of Hebrew verbs are based on a three-letter root, a three-consonant root. And that's helpful to know because when you're looking at something, if you can identify the root, then you will be more easily able also then to identify all of the other features of the verb. So root basically just means vocabulary. That makes everything else easier to figure out. Person, gender, and number. Those are categories that we remember from Greek too and are fairly easily transferable to some sort of English equivalent. Uh, what's different about Hebrew verbs is, I guess, what we would call aspect and stem. Those are the two probably big ones in terms of just comprehending what's going on. Um, Aspect is roughly equivalent to what in English we would call tense, except that aspect doesn't really have to do with time in a way that's kind of similar to the Greek verb system. It isn't so much about when the action took place as it is what kind of action is it. And Hebrew divides it into two categories, the perfect and the imperfect. Perfect means the action has been completed, and imperfect means the action has not been completed. Now, there are some other things we'll get to in a little bit as well with regards to imperative and infinitive. Um, but generally speaking, what we want to know about the action, at least in narrative terms, is the action incomplete or complete? Is it perfect or is it imperfect? Um, the other thing that's different about Hebrew verbs is what's called stem.
Steve, Steve, just quickly,
Yes.
your
Yeah,
screen's
yeah,
not being
please.
your screen's not being shared at the moment.
What?
Yeah,
I
it
could see it.
was. It was as though you could see it. Oh,
I could see it as well.
I
could
can't.
see it.
It had that list,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
I think
There,
that's what
there you
you read.
go.
Yeah,
Now,
the
now
Hebrew
it's on for
verbs.
me. There it is.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, STEM basically means there are, um, we're going to go with seven. There are seven different different inflections that the root will go through to indicate whether the verb is what you would call an active or a passive or a reflexive or a causative. We'll go through those in a little bit more detail in a few more slides. But that's what's meant by stem. Each verb can be used in a number of different stems that changes, perhaps you might say, the perspective on that action. So those are basic categories, and then we can add a bunch of things onto the verb as well. We can add suffixes or conjunctions or prepositions, like we already saw. Some of them will just get slapped straight onto the front of a verb, and a number of other things that could be added to a verb. We're basically not going to get too much into those additives today. We're going to do our best to stick to the basic stuff. So here we have the root, basically triconsonantal. and the same vowel pattern depending on its voice or aspect. Theoretically, based on a three-letter root, something that you'll come across in discussions of Hebrew verbs, and we'll see it in some of the charts that we'll look at, is that there are what we call strong verbs, and then the opposite of that would be a weak verb. A strong verb is a verb that's built on three consonants that more or less do not change. But there are weak verbs, which include in that root what's called a weak consonant, most notably verbs that contain a guttural consonant, especially hey, but then also noon is another letter that's a weak letter. I don't know why. But what happens with those weak verbs is that depending on a number of things, they can drop consonants. They just kind of disappear. One of the most frustrating ones can be the verb nathan, which means to give, but it begins and it ends with noon. And so depending on the conjugation of the verb, there are times when the only root consonant you're left with is the tav in the middle of it. And it can be kind of difficult to recognize, but I mean, we're going to stick for the most part to strong verbs because that makes it just easier to track what's going on through the various conjugations of the verbs. So aspect, we talked a little bit. The two most common, again, in terms of narrative, are perfect, which is basically a past tense, although of course you can have a past tense, or you can have a completed action in the future. You can have incomplete action in the past, and it's just context that's going to help you determine those. In addition to perfect and to imperfect, we have the imperative aspect, a command. In Hebrew, that imperative aspect is always second person. In Greek, we saw some instances where you might have a third person imperative, kind of a cohortative. That would be actually a first person. But in Hebrew, that imperative is it's just a second person thing. Inflects between second person masculine, feminine, plural, and singular. And then we also have in Hebrew something that's called the infinitive absolute. Now, let me just show you right away. There are two different forms of the infinitive. There's the infinitive absolute and the infinitive construct. In terms of the form, the actual letters, the construction of it, you can kind of equate these to the way that we talked about absolute and construct nouns as well, just in terms of the way that the way that they can look in writing. The infinitive construct is probably the easiest one. Just in terms of its equivalent to English, it functions pretty much the same way that we would use an English infinitive verb by sticking the to in front of it, right? To walk, to go, to know. Basically, the way the infinitive construct is used. The infinitive absolute is used almost more like an adverb. So I think the easiest example to use is if you look at Isaiah 6, when Isaiah has this vision in the temple, and I don't know whether he's really gung ho or not, or maybe he feels like he has no choice or not. But he says in the end, "Okay, I'll go. What do I do?" And Yahweh says, "Speak to them." And Isaiah says, "Well, for how long?" And basically, the answer that God gives, that Yahweh gives to Isaiah, is speak to them um, so that they will hear but not they will hear but not comprehend, they will see but not really perceive. And the way, if we were to translate that really literally, it would be something like, so that hearing they hear, or that so that's to hear they hear, to see they see. That first infinitive is that infinitive absolute that acts kind of like an intensifier. Um, and so that's actually the way it gets translated in the Greek as well, particularly in Mark, where Jesus uses that same passage in chapter 4 about why he's speaking in parables. Um, so um, that's usually the way that that infinitive absolute gets used, a way that kind of intensifies the action. Another example is in Jonah, when they're in the middle of a storm and they're rowing really hard. If you were to try and translate it really literally, it's like rowing they rowed, which just means they were working really hard at rowing. Um, then we also have participles,
Steve,
which,
sorry,
yes, please.
I had a question about that when
Yeah.
I know it's been pointed out to me that in Genesis when God says the world, or when he says it is good, you know, that is very good, there's tov, and then when it comes to man, it's very good and it's tov tov. Is that an instance of this?
Uh, no, that's not the infinitive construct. Um, I thought it was Tove mode. Um,
I could be
but
remembering
so
it wrong.
um, yeah, sometimes Hebrew will they will use that kind of a, I guess you could call it a sort of a duplication that is an emphatic construction. If that I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. Yeah, I had heard it. It was just like we translated very good, and it is just like you're saying emphatic. It sounded similar to this as far as the translation, but I didn't know if it was the same uh,
Yeah.
in the Hebrew.
Okay. Um, okay. Yeah. So going to participles, basically the same categories as we looked at in Greek. Um, Often used as, yeah, either as nouns to say this is the person who was doing something, or used as an adverbial or even as an adjective kind of way we're describing the person as the person who does something, um, inflecting for gender and number, but not for person. Um, Tenses, again, really, probably better defined as aspect. But if we were going to ask the question about tense and use tense, we would talk about perfect and imperfect. And you'll see those words affix and prefix behind those definitions. And that's just a way to identify whether we're looking at a perfect tense or an imperfect tense. The perfect tense, and we'll get to the chart and take a look at this, and you can see the example of it. The perfect tense is identified by by an affix. There are a letter or two added to the end of the root to indicate person and number and gender. If you look at the imperfect tense, there's always a prefix on that verb as well. So that's just what's meant there by affix and prefix. Um, let's just take a look at the example. So here, what we have is the perfect tense or perfect aspect of the verb katal. And so what you see in red there, um, and the third feminine singular is missing the red bit. The third feminine singular, the comet's hay, at the end of it, those should be red. That's the affix. The third masculine singular has no affix because the third masculine singular is the lexical form. That is the root. So in Greek, we saw that as the first person singular. In Hebrew, the lexical form is the root, which is the third masculine singular form of the verb. And then you'll notice that for the third person, there's a third common plural. There's no distinction between masculine and feminine in the perfect tense in the third person plural, but there will be, we'll see that in the imperfect, there is a distinction between the masculine and feminine in the third person plural. So I guess just by way of sounding these out, let me just read them for you so that you can hear them. And I'm actually going to start. We'll start with the singular, the third masculine singular, katal. So we're always putting the emphasis on the last syllable unless there's a marker, some reason not to. So third masculine singular, katal. And the verb katal, you will recognize from your vocabulary, means to kill, or in this case, he kills. Third feminine singular, katla. Now, let me just point this out because it's something that's going to come up again. If you look at the third feminine singular, the first vowel under the kof, there's a patach there, but then there's also a vertical line, and I'm going to actually have to go back, or maybe Ralph, can you remember what's that vertical line called? I forget the name of it. Okay, I'll look it up. So we'll get the name of it because it actually, I'm pretty sure it is on the final exam. So we'll get that. That vertical line beside the comets indicates that the comets is functioning as a short vowel. So normally, if you saw the comets and then the shava after it, you would say that shava must be vocal because it follows a long vowel. But in this case, because there's that little vertical line beside the commas, it's saying, well, no, it's actually a short vowel. So the shava is silent. So that's why pronunciation there would be katla. Second masculine singular, katalta. So we have the accent over the tet, katalta. And shava is silent because it follows a short vowel. Second feminine singular, katalta. So the two shavas at the end of the word seems awkward. We have two shavas together, so the second one must be vocal, katalta. And first common singular, katalti. So the way that I remembered these verb endings is I just I made this silly little word out of them in my head. So the the singular endings, the pattern is this, autotity, and then it's stuck in my head. You can do it however you want, and in fact, you don't even have to do it. You don't need to memorize it, but sometimes there are little tricks for just getting them to stick. If we move over to the plural side, again, we have that comets with the, I almost had the word, I forget. The comets with the vertical line, so it's acting like a short vowel. Katlu is the third common plural. Second masculine plural, kataltem. Second feminine plural, katalten. And first common plural, so there's another instance. I guess first person never changes for masculine or feminine. It's always common. First common plural, katalnu, or katalnu, depending on how particular you want to be about pronouncing that, the patach. Questions about that? Okay. So lexical form, third masculine singular, we already went over that. Um, so all of the verbs on your fourth vocabulary sheet have this vowel pattern, or have the same vowel pattern. That fourth vocabulary sheet is the one that it will be used for today's quiz. We'll go over that vocabulary again before you write the quiz, just to make sure it is cemented well. So that is perfect form. Now here is imperfect form. So this is where you see the prefix. The perfect form has no prefix. The imperfect form has the prefix. And then we also have an affix on it as well. So looking at the at the singular side, third masculine singular, yiktol, third feminine singular, tiktol, second masculine singular, tiktol. So you'll notice there that the third feminine singular and the second masculine singular forms are exactly the same. So again, context there is going to be the only way you're going to know what's going on. Second feminine singular, tiktali, and first common singular, ektol. So if you wanted to spend some time analyzing, you could see some vowel patterns happening there, particularly the holum over the tet in all but the second feminine singular form. Yeah, it's not totally random, but sometimes the changes seem weird. Third masculine plural, yiktalu. Third feminine plural, tiktolna. Second masculine plural, tiktalu. Second feminine plural, tiktolna. So then again, you'll see there that the third feminine plural and the second feminine plural are the same. So again, context, first common plural, niktol. So that's, again, what the verb paradigm looks like. It's not important that you memorize it, but that when you see it, you're able to recognize what's going on with these verbs. So that would be perfect and imperfect forms. The rest of it, we're going to see if we can go through a little bit quicker. Imperative, we know what an imperative is. We've been over that. We're giving a command. Only happens in the second person. Here's what it looks like. In some ways, it looks like the imperfect without the prefix on it. It's very similar to that. But again, the point of, the stage that we're at with things is that we're using tools to get the information anyway, right? So we're going to be using an online tool or something else to tell us what the conjugation is. This just helps us to make sense of what we're finding. Infinitive absolute functions. Again, we've been over this. It's most generally an intensifier that's placed alongside another finite verb. So one of the ways of recognizing that intensification is perhaps with a word like surely. He will surely kill. Only one infinitive absolute form does not inflect for person, gender, or number. Infinitive construct, we've been over that, generally corresponds to the way that we would use an infinitive in English. Participles, again, it can constitute the main verb in a sentence, and that perhaps is different in Hebrew than what we would find in Greek. In Greek, we would not expect a participle to be the main verb. We would still be looking for another finite verb to be a main verb in the sentence. But in Hebrew, if all you find is a participle, treat it like that's the thing that's happening. noun use, it does not serve when it's used as a noun. It does not serve as the main verb of a sentence. So if you have a finite verb and a participle, your finite verb is going to be the main one. If you don't have the finite verb, your participle is going to be where it's at. Now, here is where things start to get fun and start to get interesting, is when we start to talk about the verb stems. I'm actually going to skip this here. This is one of the handouts that you have as a PDF on Pathwright. If you want to use it as a reference sheet, this would be a really handy one. Again, you can look through it, you can discern the patterns, and see what kind of forms you're looking at. But this is the fun part. So the cal stem, and these names, the names for the stems actually indicate the vowel pattern that gets used in the stem. So they're not random. They're actually taken from one particular verb as it gets used in all of the stems. In the cal stem, what we're talking about is basic action. It's a simple active voice. So in the cal stem, take the verb katal. It means simply he kills. The next slide. So basic layout of the 7 different stems. If you're going to write anything down, this is what you need to write down. This is the part that does need to go into your memory, because this is what's going to be on the quiz and will certainly show up on the final as well. So in the cal stem, we have a simple active voice. In the nifal, we have a basic passive, or sometimes reflexive action. So if we're going to stick with our verb katal, he kills. In the cal, it's he kills. In nifal, it would be he is killed. Or depending on context, you might say he kills himself. So basically a passive sense, he is killed. So those are what you would call our simple or basic actions, whether it's active or passive. Then we get to a group of 3 that indicate an intensive or a repetitive action. So the PL stem indicates a simple or repetitive active voice. So if you put katal in the PL stem, you're going to have something like he brutally killed, or he intensely killed. It takes your basic action and it just ramps it up. So another example would be if you took the verb meaning to break, and you put that into the PAL stem, you would probably translate it as something like he shattered. It's that kind of idea of moving from basic action to an intense action. The pual stem is that same intensive or repetitive, but now it's passive. So if we were, again, to do the ridiculous thing and take this verb katal, to kill, and put it into a pual stem, you would have something like he brutally killed himself, or he repeatedly killed himself, which of course you can't do, but that would be the example of how that stem works. Then if you get to the HebrewVerbSystem, this one is probably most often a reflexive. While the nifal stem can have a reflexive tone to it, the HebrewVerbSystem is definitely reflexive. It's definitely You might even call it that middle voice where I'm doing something with the intent to be acted upon by the thing that I'm doing. And again, in that same intensive or repetitive way. So I guess actually, let me go back to Pual and just correct myself a little bit. Pual would not be he intensely killed himself. Pual would be he was intensely killed, um, or he was repeatedly killed. The Hithpael would put that into the reflexive state. He was brutally killing himself, something like that. So that's the intensive repetitive. And then we get to causative, something that's really hard to translate well into English because we just tend not to, we don't use English this way. It sounds really bad if you use English this way, but it's basically you're causing something to happen. Um, so again, if we take katal and we put it into the hifil, third person masculine singular hifil, it would be something like he caused to kill. Um, and then in the hafal, now it's in a passive. So he caused to be killed, something like that. So that's a basic definition of those stems and how the same the same verb worked through these stems changes in the way that it well in the kind of action that it is that it's communicating. Um, so here we've already been over these. Um,
Steve,
yes.
for all of those examples that you gave, I noticed you would do some of them in present tense and some of them in past or maybe past ongoing. Is there any sense of time with all of those stems? No, we get
No,
that from something
that's
else.
just my confusing inconsistency. I'm sorry. I should have put them all in the
That's
same,
okay.
but I didn't. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Good question for sure. Um, yeah. Uh,
And that would be just like the same way, like I said, that's directed to an individual. So like if you would say like the alcohol caused the accident, that wouldn't be something that or like like it wasn't the thing that caused, but the alcohol that was drunk caused the person or caused that wouldn't fit into one of those, right?
so that, I mean, when you say it that way, that sounds like something that I would expect in a Hifil stem. It's a causative action. So yeah, that would be, um, yeah, I think so. That would be a way to use it. Um, yeah. Okay. Let me just get to um, get to my chart here so that you can see. Here we go. Okay. So this is um, yeah, it's just basically a master chart of verb forms. It doesn't give you all of the conjugations, but it shows you, like, for instance, in if you just look across that top row, the third person perfect cal stem, you have katal. Now, if you look at the next one, it's the nifal stem. And if you look at the vowels that then are used, I mean, in addition to you have the noon at the beginning, and so that's a good indication that we're in the nifal stem, unless you're in a um, first person. But if you look at the vowels, you can see it starts with a hirek, and then it has a shava, a silent shava, and then you have the petah. So those vowels are the same as in that word nifal that we're using to describe the stem. Um, Same thing with piel. If you look at the vowels there in ketail, You have the hirecere, which is why we call it the piale stem. And then you can work that through for all of the following stems as well. Of course, that changes a little bit when you get to the imperfect, because with the imperfect, you're adding a prefix to the front. But the vowel pattern still remains somewhat consistent, including the addition of some consonants, especially for the hithpale. You'll see in the perfect you have the hey and the tav. In the imperfect, if you look just down one, the hey drops off because you have the imperfect, so you have to put the yod on it, but the tav still stays there. So yeah, again, nothing to memorize, just something to be aware of. Know that the tool is there if you ever want to go back and take a closer look, and see how that verb will change depending on aspect and stem. Okay. Here's your real master sheet. Again, it's there for your reference. Okay. Any other questions about verb stems? And we're going to do some practice. We're going to put you into groups, and you can work through a few things so that you can actually do it, and then we'll come back and just check it over and make sure that we're doing it the right way. But any questions before we do that? Okay. So here is what I'm going to get you to do, is that if you go on to PathWrite, let me just share my screen here. Under okay, are you seeing my PathWrite? Yeah, okay. So what we have is, I changed this to optional because we're going to be doing part of it today. I think before today it said you're going to hand it in before class next week, but I'll leave that up to you depending on whether you think you need to practice after a little exercise now. So if you open up this one here, we have a list of verbs that are on your vocabulary. And then beside each verb is a parsing for the verb. So we have cal, perfect, third common plural. And so here's what I'm actually tell you what, let's just do the first one all together. If we take our verb halak, who's got in their memory the definition for that one? What does halak mean?
Walk.
To walk. Okay. So if we're going to go in cal stem, what kind of action are we talking about?
Basic active.
Yep. Simple active. Okay. And it's perfect. So
walked.
we have two. Go ahead.
Walked, like perfect is completed.
Yep. Okay. Walked. And we have third person common plural.
They walked.
So they walked. Exactly. Yep. So, yeah, perfect. So just as a way of practicing to make sure that we're all there, work your way through I'm going to say work your way through as many of these 10 as you can. I'll put you in pairs, maybe even kind of be intentional about looking at different stems. And I mean, there are answers there too, but it's not so helpful to look at them all right away. Um, we'll take maybe 10 minutes for you to just work through these, and then we'll come back and take a look. And then if there are no further questions after that, um, then we'll look at the exercise for you to do this week. And actually, you know what? We're not going to go 10 minutes. That's too long. We're going to go 7 minutes, and then we'll be in good shape with that. So I'm going to stop recording.